During Christmas dinner with 23 guests, my daughter suddenly slid a rental agreement across the table and said coldly, "If you want to keep living in this house, you'll pay $200 a month for your room starting next month." My son-in-law smirked. "If you can't afford it, move out. We're done supporting a useless old man." The room fell silent. I said nothing. I quietly untied my apron, folded it, picked up the suitcase I had packed weeks earlier, because I knew that by the next morning, everything would change. A note. This story weaves fictional elements into its telling, shaped for both heart and meaning. Names and places are coincidental, but what it has to say, I promise, is worth your time. I'd been on my feet since 5 that morning. The ham went into the oven before sunrise, low heat, honey rubbed under the scored skin, a handful of fresh rosemary tucked in, close the way Adele always did it. Welcome back to Honor Revenge Stories. I'm glad you found your way here today. If this is your first time, go ahead and tap. Subscribe. Stories like this one tend to arrive right when you need them, and I'd hate for you to miss the next. Before we begin, I want to ask you something simple. Have you ever had someone close to you use your trust against you? Think about that as you listen. And one more thing, some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. The truth it carries, though, that part is very real. 40 Christmases, 40 years of making that same bird, regardless of whose oven I happened to be using. This year, the oven was mine, not that anyone seated at that table had the first clue about that. 7 o'clock came, and 23 people had wedged themselves into the dining room. Barrett's colleagues from work claimed the seats up near the headmen, with their collars sharp and their laughter a half-notch too generous. Glasses never quite empty. Celeste moved among them, the way someone moves at a fundraiser, their running poised, purposeful, that dress doing exactly what it was meant to do, and that smile working even harder. I kept to the margins, apron tied, spoon in hand, cycling between the kitchen and the table, the way a host operates. Nobody was using that word for me, though. Barrett held court from his chair, tilting back with the loose confidence of a man who has never once had reason to question himself, swirling his wine glass like he was keeping time. "I'm telling you," he said, "the design contract we just closed, that's the kind of deal that reshapes everything. 5 years back, I was scratching out floor plans in a studio apartment. Now look around." His hand swept the room, the chandelier above us, the crown molding the wide plank hardwood floors I'd had installed in 2018. "Built it from the ground up. That's what you get when you outwork everybody else." I placed a dish on the table and said nothing. My jaw was clenched, but my expression held. 23 people in that dining room, and not one of them understood that the ground Barrett was so proud of claiming belonged to me. Then Celeste rang her glass with her spoon. The table went still, that instant hush that arrives when a room senses something is coming. "Dad," bright voice, almost warm like a toast, was on its way. "While everyone's together, there's something I'd like to address." I held her gaze from the far end of the table, hands still resting on the serving dish. "Beginning next month," she said, "continuing to use the room at the end of the hall means contributing $200 a month. That's rent, plain and simple. This isn't a retirement arrangement, Dad. Our food is on your plate every night. Our utilities run for you." She let the pause stretch just long enough to feel deliberate. "And honestly, you're not bringing much to the table." Something in the air went flat. I registered it before I had words for it, that specific quiet that settles in when cruelty gets delivered with manners. "If the pension won't cover it," Celeste went on, pressing a crease from her napkin, "it may be time to look at options that better fit your circumstances." Every set of eyes in the room swung toward me. I felt them land one by one, each like a small stone dropped. Barrett put down his glass and came forward in his seat. "Honestly, Leonard, a little gratitude wouldn't go amiss." Smooth delivery, sharp edge underneath. 3 years we've been carrying this. Other men your age pitch in, watch the grandchildren handle things around the house. You wander through that kitchen in worn-out clothes and make my guests wonder if we run some sort of charitable shelter. He gave a short, dry laugh. "If you can't pull your weight, have a bag ready before New Year's. Nobody here is obligated to prop up a man who won't carry his own." Something clamped around my chest tight as a closed fist. My hands on the serving dish tightened at the knuckles. 68 years old, and I was repeating a single thought like a mantra: not here. Not with this audience, not tonight. Celeste pushed a sheet of paper across the table in my direction. "Room rental agreement," she said. "Tonight you sign, or you start finding somewhere else." I looked down at the page. And that's when something inside me went very quiet and very cold. Not anger exactly, but something with more weight than anger. There in the upper left corner sat a logo. Small, navy blue, clean, a stylized oak tree, its roots spreading wide into the outline of a house foundation. I knew that logo. I had sketched it with Adele in 1988 on a paper napkin in a diner in Tennessee. It was the mark of Caulfield Woodcraft and Distribution, Inc., the company I had given 4 decades to grow from a single rented room into an enterprise that held the deed to this house, owned this furniture, this chandelier, the very earth beneath Barrett's feet. My daughter had produced a rental lease on my company's letterhead inside my company's property and slid it across to me with a pen. I undid the apron strings and folded it once, then once more with the deliberate care you give something that has served you well. Laid it on the counter. "You're right," I said, steadier than I had any right to sound. No one should occupy another person's property and give nothing back. I met Celeste's eyes, held them. "Starting tomorrow." I said, "That principle applies to everyone here." I walked down the hall. My door closed behind me. The paper stayed on the table where I had left it. Later, when the voices had thinned to nothing and the house had found its nighttime quiet, I sat on the bed and took in the room Celeste had assigned me, the smallest one tucked at the corridor's end, its window aimed at the neighbor's wall. I opened the nightstand drawer and retrieved a folder I'd assembled 3 weeks prior. Inside the original lease for this property. Market rate $7,900 a month. Celeste's rate $600 a month, logged as an internal family accommodation. Her words came back. "You're not contributing anything." My throat went tight with something I wasn't about to let surface. I put the folder down and got to my feet. Walked to the closet, pulled the door open. The suitcase sat exactly where I had left it 3 weeks ago, already loaded. Everything I needed filled half of it. A man who has spent 40 years making things figures out early which things matter and which are just objects. That's when the photograph on the wall caught my eye. Adele and me the day the first workshop opened. Her hand in mine. Both of us grinning like people who couldn't quite believe their luck. I'd found that frame in the recycling bin beside the kitchen door, half buried in Christmas wrapping. I carried it back to my room and flipped it over. The back panel had been forced open. The small yellow envelope Adele had placed inside years ago, the one she'd told me to open only when the moment came, was missing. My heart didn't sink. It fell clean out from under me. Adele had said to me once, with the matter-of-fact certainty she brought to everything, that she put the things that mattered most somewhere the wrong people would never have reason to look. Standing in that small room with an empty frame in my hands, I began to grasp that she had understood something I had refused to let myself see. I'm not sure what hour it was when I finally stopped moving. The party noise dissolved gradually, glasses laughter, some child toppling something, while the grown-ups looked the other way. Then the house went still, the way an old house does when it settles into the night, trading the sounds of people for its own small creaks and sighs. I sat there on that narrow bed, dressed lights on, and let my mind drift back to a place it hadn't visited in some time. Tennessee, the start of everything. 1982. Adele and I were 27 and just reckless enough to confuse wanting something deeply with actually knowing how to go get it. We had scraped up $100, the sum total of what we had, and put our names on a lease for a workshop wedged into a row of industrial units on the outskirts of Murfreesboro. 400 square feet. A corrugated metal roof that drummed like a snare when the rain hit, and the moment you opened the door, sawdust machine oil and something else, a quality I spent years learning to name, which was possibility. Our first night there, we bedded down on a folded tarp because paying both the security deposit and the apartment rent in the same month wasn't an option. Adele never said a word against it. She folded her coat into a pillow stretched out on that tarp and said, "Leonard, the lighting in here won't work. I can't run the books if I can't see what I'm writing." "Adele," I told her, "we don't have any books yet." She looked over at me with those dark eyes that always made me feel like I was being read like a book. "We will," she said, no drama, no question. "Sort out the lighting." I sorted out the lighting. 8 weeks on our first genuine order arrived. A family a few blocks away needed a kitchen table, solid oak, 6 chairs, nothing elaborate. The man who placed it shook my hand like he was conferring a favor on me. He might have been. I gave that table 11 straight days fitting, sanding, checking every joint until my hands were cracked and sore. Each evening, Adele walked in after her diner shift, took a seat at the workbench. with a ledger borrowed from the library, and worked her way through double-entry bookkeeping, using a textbook whose spine had long since given up. "You're going to wreck the binding," I told her one night. "Then I'll tape it," she said, eyes still on the page. "Column A is income, column B is expenses. Right now column B has the lead, but that's about to change." She drew her finger along a row of figures. "3 more tables like this one, and we're even on the month." She said it the way you'd remark that the rain was going to stop. Calm, already certain, already thinking past it. When we delivered that table, the woman who'd ordered it teared up, said it was the finest piece of furniture she'd ever had in her home. My chest swelled so full I half expected a button to give way. On the ride back, Adele reached across and laid her hand over mine on the gear shift. Her fingers had gone rough from helping with the sanding. She never brought it up once. "One down," she said. "One down," I said back. The years accumulated the way solid work does, without announcement, without ceremony, just steadily. We purchased our first real equipment. We brought on our first hire, a quiet man named Alton, who could cut a dovetail joint by eye and never said more than 10 words in a day. We outgrew one workshop and moved to a larger one, then larger again. Adele took a bookkeeping course at the community college on Monday and Wednesday nights. Those evenings she'd come home carrying the smell of chalk dust and coffee, spread her notes across the kitchen table, and quiz herself aloud while I stood at the sink doing the dishes. "What's the depreciation schedule on a bandsaw?" she'd call out. "Not a clue," I'd answer. 7 years straight line method. Don't forget it." A pause. "You're dripping on the floor." When Celeste was small, 6 maybe 7, she used to pedal her bicycle down to the workshop after school and lean it against the outside wall with the proprietary confidence of a child who believes she belongs somewhere. She'd push through the heavy door stride right past Alton without a glance and haul herself up onto the stool beside me. "What are you making?" she'd ask every single time, as though my answer might one day surprise her. "A dresser," I'd say, or a bookcase, or a headboard. She'd watch for a while, then reach out and lay her small fingers on the wood with the gentle attention Adele had taught her. "It's warm," she said once, as if she hadn't expected that. "Wood holds onto the heat from the tree it came from," I told her. She sat with that for a moment, nose scrunched. "Does it remember us too when we touch it?" I looked at this small, grave person perched on a stool with sawdust on her shoes. "I think it does," I said. Adele appeared in the doorway behind her, just then still in her coat ledger tucked under one arm. She caught my eye over Celeste's head and offered a smile, not a broad one, just a quiet, private thing, the kind that said, "Look at what we built." I came back to the present with a jolt sitting on that narrow bed, with the empty picture frame between my hands. 42 years. That's what Barrett had gestured at so broadly across the dinner table, built it from the ground up, he'd declared, describing something he had no part in making. My eyes stung. Not with grief, not quite with something older and heavier than grief. Adele used to say she kept the things that mattered most somewhere safe. Not in a safe, not in a drawer somewhere that took the right person asking the right question to locate. I turned the empty frame over one more time. Whatever she'd written, wherever she'd put it, she'd had a reason for it. Adele never acted without a reason, and I had a feeling the time to find it was coming. The doctors chose their words with care. Progressive, aggressive, caught late. They delivered these things in a beige room with a window overlooking a parking structure. I sat in a plastic chair beside Adele and held her hand while they spoke. Her hand was still. Mine wasn't. On the drive home, she stared out the passenger window for a long stretch. Then she said, "Well, we'd better make sure the books are in order." "Adele, I'm serious." "Leonard." She turned to face me, eyes dry clear and absolutely set. "I am not spending whatever time I have left watching you fall apart. So pull yourself together and let's get to work." That was 2008. She fought for 6 years. Through all 6 of them, I worked harder than I ever had, not because the business demanded it, but because I had nowhere to put myself when I wasn't working. Adele kept coming in right up until the final year, settled at her desk, with a blanket across her lap, reading through contracts and flagging things she wanted me to look at. One afternoon, I walked in and found her on the phone with the accountant pressing him on a depreciation schedule with the same precision she'd had at 30. "Adele," I said when she hung up, "you're supposed to be resting." She gave me a look that could have stripped varnish. "The equipment doesn't depreciate on a slower schedule just because I'm ill. Leonard, sit down. I need to show you something." She showed me the books, all of them. Spent 3 months walking me through everything she had built, every system, every safeguard, every note she'd penciled in the margins going back 20 years. She wasn't simply teaching me the mechanics, she was making sure I could carry on without her. That thought closed my throat every single time it surfaced. She passed in March of 2014 on a Tuesday morning, with sunlight coming through the bedroom window and her hand in mine. There was nothing dramatic at the end. She looked at me for a long moment with those steady eyes, pressed my fingers once, and let go. I sat with her for a long time, after unable to move. Hector Brannick, my operations manager, the closest to a brother I'd ever had, drove me home from the hospital. We didn't say much. Hector was never one to pack silence full of words, which had always been one of the things I valued most about him. When he pulled up at the house, he left the engine running and looked straight out through the windshield. "You gonna be all right?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I'll work it out." He gave a single nod. "I'll take care of the morning meeting. Take the week, Hector. Take the week, Leonard." I took the week. Then I called him and said I wanted to step back from the day-to-day. Not retire, just step back. Hector would run the floor handle. The staff meetings represent the company publicly. I would stay involved where it counted, quietly from a small office where no one needed to know my name. Hector looked at me steadily when I laid it out. "You sure about this? People are going to talk." "Let them," I said. "I built this for the work, not the recognition." He held his gaze on me a moment longer, then gave a short nod. "All right, but I'm calling you every Friday, whether you like it or not." I'd expect nothing less. Celeste met Barrett Ventry in the spring of 2017 at some kind of networking event downtown. She brought him to Sunday dinner 6 weeks after that, which told me everything I needed to know about how serious it was before she said a word. He came in with a firm handshake and a ready smile, the kind that reached the room a half step before he did. Well put together, without making a show of it. Asked me about woodworking in a way that seemed genuinely curious. Told Celeste that she looked beautiful twice inside the first hour. By every measure, you could see he was exactly the sort of man a father hopes his daughter finds. But somewhere between the salad and the main course, he asked very casually, the way you ask about the weather, whether I still had any involvement with the family business, or whether I'd fully stepped away. I told him I'd pulled back, that a capable manager was handling the daily operations, that I kept things simple these days. He nodded pleasantly and shifted to another subject, but something in how he received that too smoothly, filing it away without a single follow-up, sat wrong. Not wrong enough to do anything about, just wrong enough that I noticed. I told myself I was being a father who'd held on too long. Celeste was 32 and lit up in a way I hadn't seen from her in years, leaning toward this man across the table like she was turning towards something warm. Who was I to put a shadow across that? So I let it go. 3 years on, in the fall of 2020, Celeste called and said she was worried about me rattling around alone in my apartment. "You seem lonely, Dad." "Come stay with us a while," she said. "We've got the space." She meant the bedroom at the corridor's end, the estate that Caulfield Woodcraft and Distribution Inc. had acquired in 2016, the one Celeste and Barrett had been living in since their wedding, at a family rate of $600 a month, against a market value pushing nearly $8,000. I said yes. I told myself I was doing it to be near my daughter, which was true as far as it went. But underneath that, in a part of my mind, I tended not to probe. I had never fully let go of something the way Barrett Ventry had received the news about my retirement. Smooth, efficient. No questions worth asking, apparently. I arrived that November carrying 2 suitcases and the story I was telling myself, just a father wanting to be close. I should have trusted the part I wasn't probing. There's a specific feeling that settles in when you understand that someone has been studying you behind a smile. It doesn't hit all at once, it accumulates. One misaligned detail here, another one surfacing weeks later. Taken separately, each one has a perfectly sensible explanation. Laid end to end, they form a shape you recognize, and by the time the shape is clear, you've been inside it longer than you thought. The first detail turned up in September. I went to the second-floor study to retrieve an old product catalog, a 1997 Caulfield Woodcraft binder I'd held onto, more for memory than for use. The study was Barrett's domain technically, but that binder had lived in the bottom drawer of the oak filing cabinet I'd hauled from my apartment on moving day. Same spot, same angle, pushed to the back left corner. That was how I always left it. It wasn't how I found it. The binder had been taken out and returned, but whoever put it back had landed it 2 inches right of where it belonged and had the spine facing the wrong way. I kept my hand on the drawer and felt something cool travel up the back of my neck. Barrett must have been digging for something and shifted it without thinking that was the reasonable read. Reasonable enough. I repositioned the binder and kept my mouth shut. The second detail arrived in October, and this one resisted any reasonable read. Hector rang me on a Wednesday morning, and something in the very first syllable told me the call wasn't routine. Hector Brannick didn't traffic an alarm. 3 decades together, and I could count on one hand the times I'd heard him sound urgent. So, when he said, "Leonard, sit down first," I sat. "I heard from the bank," he said. "There's a loan moving through processing. Business expansion, $300,000. The guarantor line has your signature on it." The room seemed to lean. "Hector, I haven't put my name on any loan paperwork. Not in 2 years. "Correct." A pause. "Which is exactly why I'm on the phone." "Who filed the application?" "Barrett Ventry is listed as the primary borrower. Your name sits on the guarantor line." He let that breathe for a moment. "Leonard, something's off here. The bank flagged it. You have no prior contact with their commercial lending side. They rang our main office to confirm." My grip on the phone went tight. Through the window, a city bus moved along the street below, indifferent and unhurried, and I had the surreal sensation of watching ordinary life continue without interruption, while something structural beneath it gave way. "Leave the bank alone for now," I said. "Tell them you're conducting an internal review, and Hector, this stays between us. Not a word inside the office." "Already there," he said, his voice level. "You holding up?" "I'm fine," I said. "Expect a call from me tonight." I sat at the kitchen table afterward for a full 20 minutes, not moving, thinking through what a forged guarantor signature actually meant when you followed it through. Under federal law, putting another person's name on a financial document without their consent is forgery. Presenting that document to a lender to secure money is wire fraud. Both carry felony weight. Barrett had inscribed our names together onto a federal offense. What I needed to determine now was how far back the practice ran. The third detail was Celeste. Around mid-October, she started working my health into our breakfast conversations, in a manner that didn't feel like a daughter's worry. It felt like a process. She'd angle into it with deliberate softness. "Dad, have you noticed yourself losing track of things lately, more than you'd expect?" "My reading glasses," I said. "Same as the last 20 years. "No, I mean things that matter. Bigger things." She turned her spoon in her coffee, not meeting my eyes. "I've been reading about how common it is at your stage of life. There's really no shame in it." "Celeste," I said, watching her. "What exactly have you been reading?" She glanced up, a quick smile. "I just worry, you know me." I did know her, and the person across the table running these careful, rehearsed questions through a carefully relaxed tone was not the daughter I'd raised. Something had been prepared in advance. I could sense the architecture of a script beneath the conversation. "I appreciate the concern," I said pleasantly. "My mind feels as clear as it ever did." She moved us to another subject, but before her phone went back in her pocket, I caught her thumb keying something in under the table. The fourth detail nearly slipped past me. I'd begun taking afternoon naps since moving in the guest room, trapped the western sun, and turned warm by midday. I drifted up from a light sleep to sounds in the hallway, footsteps, then stillness. I stayed flat and listened. A few seconds passed, then came the rustle of paper, followed by the clean, distinct click of a phone camera shutter. I pushed myself up, crossed the room, and cracked the door. Barrett stood at the narrow hallway table, the one that held a small basket where I kept my wallet, my reading glasses, and a photocopy of my driver's license I'd made for an application that never went anywhere. He was photographing the license, tilting it at an angle to kill the glare. He hadn't heard me. I held the door cracked for exactly 3 seconds, then drew it closed without a sound. My pulse was going in a way I hadn't experienced in years, not fear, but the sharp, clarifying jolt of watching a suspicion prove itself right. The fifth detail came through Hector in November. "Security camera in the secondary warehouse is down again," he said. "Third failure in 6 weeks. Same window each time, 2 days. And it always falls right ahead of inventory count." "What's the shortfall looking like?" "It's still running the numbers. But, Leonard, there's a pattern. It's the same category every time. Premium stock. Cash-friendly merchandise." I closed my eyes for a moment. When I opened them, my thinking had already moved ahead. Hector, pull every inventory record going back 18 months, run them against the sign-off sheets and handle it personally. Those files don't get touched by anyone else. Understood. A beat of hesitation. Leonard, how long have you had a feeling about this? September, I said. Possibly before that if I'm willing to be honest. What's the plan? I was looking out at the November trees stripped bare while I mentally sorted what had to be relocated, what needed duplicating, what required locking down before it was reached. I'm going to let it play out, I said, and when it does, I'll be positioned. 2 weeks before Christmas, I had quietly signed a lease on a small apartment on the other side of the city, registered in my name only at an address Celeste and Barrett had never encountered and had no cause to seek. First month paid in cash. The only person who knew was Hector. Over the following 3 weeks, I moved through it all without haste. Every original document went into a safety deposit box at a branch Barrett had no connection to. Copies of the key files were made, but each one carried a small intentional mistake, buried in the figures, one transposed digit planted, so I could trace which copy had been disturbed if anything disappeared. I loaded a suitcase and slid it to the back of the closet. And then I let Christmas come. Hector was parked half a block down, not right out front that would have announced itself. He'd tucked the truck between a minivan and a delivery van engine cold lights dark. I picked him out the instant I stepped onto the sidewalk because after 30 years, I knew precisely where he'd position himself. That's what 3 decades of working beside someone gives you, the same knowledge a long marriage does. He was out of the cab before I reached him, lifted the bag straight from my grip, and laid it in the truck bed without a word exchanged. I settled into the passenger seat. The cab carried the scent of coffee and the cedar air freshener Adele had always teased him about. "You doing all right?" he asked, easing out onto the street. "I've had better Christmases," I said. He made a sound that fell somewhere short of a laugh. "How bad?" Bad enough that she'd slid a rental agreement across the dinner table in front of 23 guests, printed on company letterhead. Hector's hands tightened against the wheel. "She doesn't know." "Correct," I said. "Neither does he." "Neither." We covered most of the drive in silence. That had always been one of Hector Brannick's better qualities. He grasped that certain moments were better left unfilled. It had been true of him since his early days as my floor supervisor, back when I was still running the saw myself. A composed man with a sharp eye and a longer memory than people tended to assume. My apartment occupied the 4th floor of a building, with no particular character, but reliable heat, and a landlord who actually showed up when something broke. Hector had a key. He'd been the one to help me get settled there when I decided I needed a place that was entirely my own, separate from the estate, away from any address Celeste or Barrett had on record. He'd already put coffee on. 2 mugs waited on the kitchen counter, trailing steam. I trusted Hector Brannick the way you trust someone who has given you no reason across decades to do otherwise. But the past 3 months had taught me that trust unsupported by documentation was simply faith. And faith by itself wouldn't hold up in any courtroom I was likely to be standing in. Before I told him the full picture, I asked him one thing: whether he'd agree to let me set up a small exterior camera at any location where he met with outside contacts for both our sakes. He held my gaze for a long moment, then said yes, without asking why. I sat at the table and laid everything out. The dinner, Celeste's announcement. Barrett's little performance about dead weight and old men, the rental agreement with the oak tree logo in the corner. Hector listened the whole way through without cutting in. That was his manner. When I finished, he turned his mug slowly between both hands. "Barrett rang the warehouse line yesterday," Hector said. "Asked one of the junior staff about the quarterly audit schedule. Casual, like he was just running down a list." I looked at him. "He's working to a deadline. Whatever he's set in motion, he needs it finished before the end of January." Hector set his mug down. "Leonard, there's something else. That accountant over at the secondary store, Darla Prentice, the one, signing off on all the damaged goods reports." He paused. "I pulled her HR file last week. The references she put down don't hold up. One of those companies never existed. The other one folded in 2018. My stomach went tight. "How did she make it through the hiring process?" "Barrett handled her onboarding personally. Said she'd been referred by a business contact." Hector's jaw shifted. I didn't push back at the time. I should have. "We'll deal with Darla separately," I said. "Right now, I need to concentrate on what Sylvia can move on straight away." I checked the microwave clock. She said 8:00. She'll be there. Sylvia Ostroff had handled our legal affairs for 9 years. Adele had found her, had done what Adele always did, which was to research thoroughly, ask the hard questions, and reach a conclusion she never revisited. Sylvia was 53, precise in the particular way that effective lawyers are precise, and she had a gift for unpacking complicated legal territory in plain speech, without making you feel talked down to. She ran a 3-room practice on the 14th floor of a building in the center of downtown. When Hector and I arrived at 8:00 on the morning of December 26th, she already had 3 folders spread across the desk and a legal pad dense with notes. "Leonard," she shook my hand, then Hector's. "Sit down. I want to walk through this in sequence." She was not someone who spent time on pleasantries when there was work in front of her. I had always respected that. 3 assets currently in use. She began turning the first folder face up. The supplemental credit card, the vehicle, and the residence. One at a time. The credit card is the most straightforward. It's a supplemental card on your personal account. As the primary holder, you can request cancellation today this morning with a single call. Under federal consumer credit law, the primary account holder holds absolute authority over any supplemental card. No notice required, no justification owed. It goes dark, and the supplemental holder has no recourse. "Do it today," I said. She made a note. The vehicle is equally clean. The SUV is registered to Caulfield Woodcraft and Distribution, Inc. Barrett Ventry was given temporary use authorization. And I want to be precise about that word because it appears in the authorization document 4 times. She permitted herself a dry expression that stopped just short of a smile. That authorization can be pulled at any time, with no notice required. We issue a formal retrieval request, give him 48 hours to hand over the vehicle, and if he doesn't comply, we dispatch a tow team with the spare key. How soon can the retrieval notice go out? "Tomorrow morning," I nodded. She opened the 3rd folder, which was noticeably thicker than the other 2. "The residence is more layered, but it runs in your favor. I've been through the lease Celeste signed in 2020, and I've identified 5 separate breaches of its terms." She read them aloud one by one, subletting a portion of the property for commercial filming without written consent, making structural changes to the home office without prior approval, using the property address as collateral on a loan application without authorization, hosting commercial events on 3 documented occasions, and failing to pay the agreed accommodation fee for 11 of the past 14 months. With each one, something settled heavier in my chest. Not from surprise, from the recognition that each violation had been a deliberate choice Celeste had made one after another in a house that was mine. "Under applicable landlord-tenant law," Sylvia continued, "these breaches constitute material violation of the lease. When I totaled the remediation costs, the outstanding fees and the penalty clauses built into the original contract, clauses Celeste assigned and initialed, the aggregate liability reaches $34,200. The room held still for a moment. "She assumed the worst outcome was having to pack up and move," I said. Sylvia said simply, "Do you want to proceed?" I looked at her across that desk. 9 years she'd been managing our legal work, had watched the company develop, helped engineer the ownership structure, drafted the instruments that made everything I was now setting in motion possible. "Sylvia," I said, "I've been certain since October. Let's not lose any more time." She lifted her pen. "I'll have everything ready by end of day." I was back at the apartment by 11:00. I changed out of what I'd worn to Christmas dinner, brewed a fresh pot, and settled at the small woodworking bench I kept on the balcony. A piece of black walnut I'd been shaping for no particular purpose sat in the vise, half-finished, waiting. I picked up a hand plane and started working. The grain was fine and straight the wood, giving cleanly under each pass, every stroke leaving the surface a degree smoother than before. I worked at a steady pace and kept my mind quiet. There's something in that rhythm, the push against the grain, the slight resistance, the way a well-maintained tool in familiar hands always finds its angle that settles me like nothing else manages to. By afternoon, Sylvia would be making a phone call about a credit card. By morning, 2 men in company uniforms would be on their way to collect a vehicle. And Celeste, somewhere on the other side of the city, was moving through her day with no awareness that the ground beneath her had already started to give. I kept planning. The walnut peeled away in thin, pale ribbons and gathered around my feet. Hector called at 3:17 in the afternoon. I was still at the bench, the piece of black walnut half-shaped in the vise, when my phone vibrated against the wood. I picked it up and caught something in his voice. I didn't often hear a kind of reined-in amusement sitting right alongside something more serious. "You're going to want to look at Celeste's social media page," he said. "Hector, I don't have a social media account." "I know. Use the browser, search her name. The video is set to public." A pause. "It already has views, a lot of them." I set down the hand plane, went inside, and opened my laptop. The whole thing began in a parking structure. Celeste had chosen the Meridian Quarter as her backdrop, one of those luxury retail temples, where the tissue paper in the bag costs more than most people's purchases elsewhere, and the sales staff memorize your face after your second visit. She was polished when the camera went live. Fresh coat, fresh blowout. She glided through the floor displays the way someone does when refusal has never once entered their vocabulary, lifting a deep burgundy evening gown to her shoulders and angling toward the lens. "New Year's needs a new dress, right?" Laughter. "This one is calling my name?" She walked it to the register and laid the card on the counter with the unhurried ease of someone whose plastic had never once been questioned in 3 years. The cashier swiped it, checked the screen, swiped it a second time. "I'm sorry, ma'am, it's not going through." "That's strange." The smile didn't leave Celeste's face, but something moved behind it. "Try it one more time." Third time. Nothing changed. The smile pulled tight at the corners. She stepped away from the counter phone, already outstream, still running the lens now trained on the marble at her feet, the microphone gathering every syllable without mercy. She dialed the number printed on the card's back. The hold music lasted 38 seconds. I counted. "Thank you for calling," said the voice. "How can I help you today? My card was just declined." Celeste said, her tone dropping into that careful, controlled register that people reach for when they're losing their composure and determined not to show it. "I need an explanation. The card number ends in 4829. One moment while I access the account keys clicking in the background. I'm seeing here that this is a supplemental card on an account belonging to a Mr. Leonard Caulfield. Is that correct?" The camera was still pointed at the floor. The microphone, however, caught everything. "Yes." Celeste said, the word measured. "That's my father. The supplemental card on this account was canceled this morning, at the request of the primary account holder. The cancellation went into effect at 11:47 a.m. I'm sorry for any inconvenience." 11 seconds after that, the stream went dark. Hector had forwarded me the clip and a screenshot of the viewer, count 340 people had been watching, when Celeste's voice said, "That's my father," and the screen went black. I shut the laptop and leaned back. Sylvia had phoned the bank at 11:15 that morning, right after we'd wrapped up. Start to finish it hadn't taken 10 minutes. Federal consumer credit law gives a primary account holder the right to cancel any supplemental card at any moment for any reason with no obligation to warn the card's user beforehand. Celeste had no avenue of appeal. What she had instead was 340 strangers who'd witnessed her learning that lesson on camera in a fitting room. Not long after, Sylvia sent me a full breakdown of the supplemental card's charges, every line item from the past 12 months. I went through it at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold at my elbow. $96 for $12 across 12 months. Restaurants for a start. The names I recognized. These were places where a single entree runs what I once budgeted for a whole week's materials. A spa stay in Asheville. 6 separate hits from one boutique in March. A hotel night in New Orleans I'd never heard a word about. Woven in between a steady drip of smaller things that totaled up faster than they should, candles throw pillows a monogrammed robe. Objects made to be photographed, not used. What halted me, what made me lower the page and press my fingers hard against the bridge of my nose, were the captions. Celeste had been posting alongside these purchases on her social accounts, and I'd scrolled past a handful over the years without stopping. This time, I went looking deliberately. A dark green leather handbag bought in April. Barrett spoils me rotten. Honestly, don't deserve him. A resort weekend in the Berkshires, billed to my account in June. Husband of the year. I married the right man. A set of custom dining chairs. I knew that supplier. I'd used them myself for commercial work. Posted in August with the note, "Finally upgraded our dining room. Barrett has such incredible taste." I sat with those words a good while. 3 years. For 3 years, I'd been bankrolling a narrative one Celeste had tended carefully, in which she was a well-loved woman with a generous husband and a life they had shaped together. A narrative that cast me as an incidental figure, the old man in the workshop apron, the quiet presence in the back, the father who required minding. I hadn't been providing for my daughter. I had been underwriting a fiction. The coffee was stone cold. I poured it down the drain, then stood at the kitchen window watching the street. Whatever light December had offered was already going. The month is stingy that way. The next morning, Barrett had a sit-down with a prospective client, a meeting he had spent all month getting ready for, according to what Hector had picked up around the warehouse. I knew the vehicle he intended to arrive in. I knew his departure time. I knew our retrieval crew would already be waiting when he pulled up. Hector rang at 10:43, and I understood before he said a word that it was finished. I was at the kitchen table, second coffee, actual print newspaper. One of the handful of old habits I haven't shed when it rang. I set the paper down flat and answered. "It's done," Hector said. "You want the full version or the short one?" "The full version." "Walk me through it." He'd placed one of our logistics men outside the Keystone Partners building on Commerce Street at 8:30 that morning. A reliable hand named Theo, who'd worked for us 11 years and never asked questions that weren't his to ask. Barrett's 900 was with Keystone Partners procurement director, the sort of appointment that could land a contract worth $180,000. Best Hector could determine it was the biggest potential deal Barrett's design firm had ever chased. He showed up at 8:52, pulled right to the front, Hector said. Best spot in the lot, directly beneath the building's sign. I didn't need to stretch my imagination. Barrett climbing out of that black SUV leather seats heated everything a sound system that ran more than some people's rent. Tugging his jacket straight, thumbing the key fob so the lights blinked once against the winter air. Every inch the picture of a man who considered himself arrived. The procurement director had come down to the lobby to greet him personally, Hector went on. They were exchanging handshakes on the front steps when Theo stepped forward with the retrieval documents. How did Barrett take it? Hector made a noise that fell short of a laugh. First he told Theo he had the wrong man, then the wrong vehicle. Then once Theo produced the registration, Caulfield Woodcraft and Distribution Inc. Plain as day on the opening line, Barrett announced the paperwork was forged and he'd be getting his attorney on the phone. And Theo told him, "That's your right, sir. If you'd like to do that, I'll also ask you to take a look at the use authorization you executed in March of 2021. Hector paused there. I'd seen to it that Theo carried a highlighted copy. Barrett's name was on page 1, page 3, and the last page. The clause that mattered was underlined in yellow. This authorization is temporary in nature and may be revoked by Caulfield Woodcraft and Distribution Inc. at any time and without prior notice. I turned my coffee mug in slow circles, both hands wrapped around it. How long did Barrett hold out? I asked. About 8 minutes, Hector said. He escalated before he backed down. At one point, and Hector told me he was passing this along, word for word, from Theo. Barrett said, "Do you have any idea who I am?" Theo's answer, "Yes, sir. You're the authorized temporary user of this vehicle, and the authorization has been revoked." Keystone Partners procurement director had remained on the front steps the whole time. Theo said the man had crossed his arms before the 3rd minute was up and was checking his watch well before the 6th. Did Barrett give up the keys? I asked. He did eventually. Signed the return paperwork. Theo's team documented the vehicle's condition, took their photographs, and drove it away. Hector delivered all of this in the flat, even tone he uses when he's resolved something that required resolving. Barrett straightened his jacket a second time and went up for the meeting regardless. I knew where that was heading, but I wanted to hear it said. Did Keystone Partners keep the appointment? Their office rang our main line 2 hours on to ask for confirmation of the vehicle registration. A brief silence. I confirmed it. The meeting was canceled, Hector said, for good, based on what their assistant told him. I put the phone on the table and let my eyes rest on the window. Quiet street. A Tuesday in the back end of December, the city still dragging itself out from under the holiday. A woman went by below with a small dog working against the leash with everything it had. A pair of kids on bikes. The ordinary world carrying on the way it always does. I picked the phone back up. Hector. Yeah, the SUV. What year did we buy it? A brief pause while he checked. March 2018. Why just turning something over in my mind? I'd purchased that vehicle in the spring of 2018, 4 months after Adele died. I ordered it because the company needed a dependable hauler for sample runs and client visits, and because landing on a practical decision was about the only thing I could manage that particular month. Vehicle choices had always been Adele's territory. She had firm views on fuel economy and cargo capacity that I had deferred to for years without giving it a second thought. As it turned out, I never used the thing the way I'd planned. By the time the title cleared and the plates were on, I'd already stepped back from daily operations, and the SUV sat unused in the company lot for 6 months before Hector suggested we put it with Barrett for client calls. He has important clients, Celeste had said when Hector raised it with her. Something more professional would reflect better on him. I'd agreed without much thought. I believed I was being useful. I believed I was smoothing things along for my daughter. I was wrong about both. Hector, I said, what time did Sylvia send the third letter? 9 this morning. Certified mail and email both. The third letter, the one about the property. The violations the $34,000 Celeste had no idea she owed, while Barrett had been pulling that SUV up to the Keystone Partners entrance with the bearing of a man who owned it outright, while Celeste had been waking up each morning in a house that legally belonged to my company and not to her. Sylvia had already put that document into the world. Both realities were now on their way to becoming unavoidable. Celeste is going to call, I said. She already has, Hector answered twice. Sylvia's office handled both. She's on the schedule to speak with Sylvia at 2 Esperanzaro. I glanced at the clock on the kitchen wall. 11:15. In 2 hours and 45 minutes, Celeste Caulfield Ventry was going to learn that a canceled credit card and a husband stripped of his vehicle in front of his most important client were not the worst developments of her week. The worst one had landed in her inbox at 9 o'clock that morning. She just hadn't opened it yet. I found my page in the newspaper and went back to reading. Sylvia had already set up the speakerphone by the time I arrived. I walked into her office at 1:55, 5 minutes ahead of the call. She was behind her desk with 2 folders spread open and a legal pad covered in her small, precise handwriting. She glanced up as I came in, waved me toward the chair across from her, and said she rang twice this morning. She's angry, but she'll keep a lid on it. She always does. I settled into the chair. You've dealt with her before. Once 3 years ago, when the lease was being drawn up. Sylvia uncapped her pen. She asked at the time whether the accommodation rate could come down further. I told her 600 was already well under market. She thanked me and dropped it. A short pause. She's sharper than she presents. Don't sell her short. I never have, I said. The phone rang at exactly 2 surf. Sylvia picked up. She switched on the speaker and rested the handset flat on the desk between us. Good afternoon, Mrs. Ventry. Thank you for calling. I have the file in front of me. I want to understand what's happening here. Celeste's voice came through the line, clipped and controlled, the way it went when she was working to keep something much larger from breaking through. I received an email this morning, violations and fees. I've been in that house for 3 years without a single complaint against me. That's not quite accurate, Sylvia said in the same even tone she might use to note a minor error in a column of figures. We've had documented concerns for some time. Shall I take you through them? A moment of quiet. Go ahead. Sylvia opened the first folder. The lease agreement you signed in October of 2020 limits the property to residential use only. During the spring of last year, you allowed a commercial production company to film promotional material on the premises on 3 separate occasions. We have their invoices which list the property address. That was just a friend with a camera. The invoices characterize it as a paid commercial engagement, Sylvia said, without inflection. The second violation, the lease requires written authorization from the property owner before any structural changes are made. The second floor home office was reconfigured walls, electrical work, built-in shelving. No authorization was ever requested or given. Celeste said nothing. Third, Sylvia continued. In February of this year, the property address appeared as a residential asset on a loan application submitted by Barrett Ventry to a private lending institution. Pledging leased property as collateral without the owner's written consent is a breach of contract, and depending on the lender's terms, it may also be actionable under state fraud statutes. I watched Sylvia's expression as she read through it. Her eyes stayed on the page, her delivery steady and without hurry. The manner of someone who has read this kind of document enough times to know that making it feel personal is the one thing you cannot afford. For me, every word of it felt exactly that. Fourth, she said the lease bars commercial activity on the premises. We have records of 3 ticketed events held at the property, a networking reception in April, a product launch in July, and a holiday pop-up in November. All 3 were advertised publicly with the property address included. Those were small gatherings. They were commercial events, Sylvia said. And fifth, the accommodation fee of $600 per month has been paid in full for 3 of the past 14 months. The remaining 11 months show either partial payment or nothing at all. The line went quiet for a beat. I could hear Celeste breathing. When I factor in the remediation costs for the unauthorized modifications, the outstanding accommodation fees, and the penalty clauses set out in your signed agreement, Sylvia said, the total liability comes to $34,200. That's Celeste stopped. Started again. That's not possible. It's itemized in the document we sent this morning, pages 3 through 6. Sylvia set the folder down and lifted her pen. You have 2 options, Mrs. Ventry. The first is to vacate the property within 30 days, return it in the condition the original agreement specifies, and submit to a full property and financial audit. The $34,000 liability stands regardless of which option you select. And the second option is to apply for a lease renewal at the current market rate for that property. To be considered, you would need to provide complete financial documentation, tax returns for the past 2 years, bank statements, income verification, and a current credit report for both you and your husband. If the application is approved and the outstanding balance resolved, you may remain under a new agreement. Another silence, longer this time. What is the market rate? Celeste asked. Though something in the way she said it suggested she already sensed the answer would not be kind. $7,900 per month, Sylvia said flatly. I could almost follow the arithmetic playing out on the other end of the line. Barrett's design firm was bleeding money. Hector's digging into the loan applications had made that plain. Celeste's event work brought in real income, but not on that scale. $7,900 a month was simply beyond reach. But Celeste Caulfield Ventry had never at any point in her adult life picked the road that required conceding she couldn't handle something. We'll submit the application, she said. Give us 10 days. Sylvia looked at me across the desk. I gave one small nod. 10 days is acceptable, Sylvia said. We'll need the full documentation package by the 5th of January. Incomplete submissions will not be considered, fine, Celeste said. You'll have it. The call ended. Sylvia reached over and clicked the speakerphone off. She looked at me for a moment without saying anything. Then she's going to submit falsified documents. Yes, I said, which means this becomes a fraud matter on top of the breach of contract. Yes, I said again. Sylvia made a note on her legal pad. I got up, buttoned my coat, and took my hat from the chair beside me. Leonard, Sylvia said, not yet looking up. What she just chose to do, you understand that changes the shape of this considerably. I know, I said. She made that choice on her own. I didn't make it for her. I stepped out into the December afternoon, hands buried in my coat pockets, the cold coming at my face like a blade. Celeste had just decided of her own free will that she could cover a problem with paper that wouldn't survive any real scrutiny. She'd done it because she needed the house to remain hers, needed the image to hold, needed the story she'd been telling everyone herself, most of all, to keep standing just a while longer. What she didn't know was that every page of that false application would feed directly into the file Sylvia was assembling, and that file was nearly finished. What I was about to learn had been in motion far longer than I'd realized. Before I take you there, let me ask you something. If you discovered that someone you trusted had been quietly working against you from the very beginning, would you confront them the moment you knew, or would you wait and let them believe they still had the upper hand? The call came at 6:48 in the evening from the man I'd asked to keep watch. No formal title, just a retired warehouse supervisor named Burl who'd put in 19 years with us and in retirement had discovered a particular gift for sitting in parked cars and paying attention. 3 weeks earlier, I'd asked him to let me know if he ever spotted Hector meeting with anyone out of the ordinary, outside of normal business hours. It was the kind of request that would have sounded like paranoia if I'd explained it, so I left the reason out. Burl didn't ask. Hector went into Bellacino's about 40 minutes ago. Burl told me Bellacino's was a mid-range Italian place out in Franklin, the sort of restaurant you chose specifically because no one you knew was likely to walk through the door. He's with a younger man. Dark coat, nice watch. They've got the back corner. My stomach fell. Thank you, Burl, I said. You can head home. I already knew who the younger man was. Hector had mounted a camera on the exterior of Bellacino's 3 weeks back after I'd told him I wanted a visual record of anything out of the ordinary. The feed went to a secure server I could reach from my laptop. I pulled it up at 7:15 and watched. The angle came from across the street, slightly elevated, clear enough to make out both men through the front window, not close enough to read lips. But I didn't need lips. Barrett leaned across the table and pushed a thick envelope toward Hector. Hector picked it up, glanced at it, and tucked it inside his jacket. I closed the laptop. I sat in my kitchen with the lights off for a long time after that. Not because I needed to think anything through. I'd already turned over every possibility before the screen went dark. I sat because I had nowhere to put what I was feeling, and 68 years of living had shown me that some things have to pass through you before you can do anything with them. 30 years. Hector Brannick had been with me for 30 years. He was the one who rang the ambulance when Adele fell in the warehouse in 2006. He was the one who drove me home the day she died. He'd sat across from me in this same kitchen barely 3 days ago and said, "Take the weak Leonard," in a voice that carried more genuine feeling than most people manage in whole conversations. And now he was in a restaurant in Franklin with my son-in-law pocketing an envelope. It wasn't just that my chest tightened. It felt like something load-bearing had given way, a structural wall that had been quietly holding everything upright had cracked clean through. I didn't call anyone. I didn't move for close to 2 hours. At 11:42, my phone rang. "Are you still awake?" Hector said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "Yes." A pause. "I need to come over, right now if that's all right." "Door's unlocked," I said. He was there 12 minutes later, still in the dark coat from the restaurant. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table and placed the envelope between us without saying a word. I looked at it. "I didn't touch it." "Open it," Hector said. The envelope was thick. I'd braced for cash tight bundles, the kind of thing that explains a great deal while making you feel sick about all of it. Instead, when I reached in and drew out the contents, I found a document 14 pages on legal paper, with signature lines at the bottom of pages 7 and 14. I read the opening paragraph. Then I read it again. It was an affidavit, a sworn statement prepared for filing with the Tennessee state court system under Article 81 of the Mental Hygiene Law, the statute governing guardianship proceedings. The document held that Leonard Caulfield, age 68, had displayed a consistent and documented pattern of cognitive decline, memory loss, disorientation, and inability to manage his own financial affairs, and that he was therefore no longer competent to oversee the operations or assets of Caulfield Woodcraft and Distribution, Inc. The signature lines on pages 7 and 14 were designated for Hector Brannick, identified as a long-term associate and witness to the behaviors described. I set the document on the table. "He wants you to have me declared incompetent. That's what this is." Hector reached into his coat and produced a small recording device, no bigger than a pen, matte black, the kind available at any electronics shop. He placed it beside the envelope. I had this on me from the moment I walked into that restaurant. 3 hours and 14 minutes of recorded conversation. Tennessee is a one-party consent state, meaning that because I was a party to that conversation, the recording is entirely legal and admissible. I looked at the device. "What did he offer you?" $20,000 to sign the affidavit. 10 up front, 10 once the guardianship petition went through. Hector's voice had gone flat the way it did when he was holding something much larger in check. He also said, "And I want you to hear this clearly, Leonard, that once he had control of the company assets, he'd see to it that I was taken care of." His words. The kitchen was very quiet. I pushed back my chair and went to the counter. I filled the kettle and set it on the burner, took 2 mugs down from the cabinet, and found the coffee in the drawer where it always lived. My hands moved through those familiar motions, while something large and beyond naming moved through everything else. When I turned back around, Hector was watching me with an expression I recognized, the same one he'd worn at Adele's funeral. Standing a little apart from the others, not crying just there, solid, still fixed in place. "You should have told me," I said. "I needed you to see the footage first." He said, "I needed you to feel what it was like to believe I'd done it, because Barrett is going to try to use that feeling as a weapon. The idea that you can't rely on the people closest to you. I wanted you to know from your own experience that you can." I had nothing to say to that. I poured the coffee. We sat across from each other with our mugs and let the quiet do the work. That was the thing about 30 years together. Words weren't always required. A cup of coffee and a still kitchen at midnight could be the whole of it. Before Hector left, he paused at the door. "One more thing," he said. "That accountant at the secondary store, Darla Prentice." He stopped. "I found something. You need to hear it before we take another step." He walked out before I could ask what he meant. I didn't sleep much after Hector left. By 5:30, I gave up on it entirely. Made coffee and took a seat at the workbench on the balcony until the sky had enough light to make the drive to the warehouse worthwhile. He'd said, "You need to hear it before we take another step." 7 words, with a talent for filling up every quiet corner of a small apartment at 4 in the morning. I pulled into the warehouse lot at 6:40. Hector's truck was already there. He was in his office, a room barely larger than a generous closet tucked behind the main floor, with a window looking out over the production line. Files were spread across every inch of the desk. He'd been at it for a while. 2 empty coffee cups sat at the corner of the desk, and a legal pad was covered in handwriting that grew smaller and more compressed toward the bottom of the page, the way Hector's hand always tightened when he was working something out. He looked up as I came in and pulled the chair across from his desk out for me. "Sit down," he said. "This is going to take a few minutes." He opened with the numbers. Over the past 24 months, Hector said, opening the first folder, 47 inventory write-offs were processed under the damaged goods classification. Total value written off 210 more 400. He turned the folder so it faced me. Every one of those write-offs had been authorized by the same person. He pointed to a column of signatures running down the right-hand side of the page, the same name appearing 47 times. Darla Prentice. How does the damaged goods process work? I asked even though I knew the answer. I wanted to hear Hector walk through it out loud. Merchandise gets flagged as damaged or unsalvageable during receiving or quality inspection. The inventory manager signs off on a write-off authorization. The items come out of the active system and are supposed to be disposed of or sent back to the supplier. He paused. In those cases, the merchandise was pulled from the system, but it never got disposed of. It was collected by a courier service that shows up nowhere on our approved vendor list. Cash transactions, no paper trail beyond what surfaced when we started pulling the receiving logs. High-end stock, I said, recalling what he'd told me back in November. Custom dining sets, upholstered pieces, the kind of inventory that moves easily for cash and carries no serial numbers. Hector closed the folder. We're talking about pieces that retailed anywhere from $3,000 to $8,000 each. 47 units over 2 years. I worked out the arithmetic without putting pen to paper. Darla Prentice signed all 47 authorizations. I said everyone in Barrett. Hector opened the second folder. Barrett doesn't show up on any of the write-off documents directly, but the courier pickups we managed to trace were scheduled through an email account registered to his design firm. Different name, different domain, but the IP address resolves back to his office network. I settled back in the chair. Through the window, the production floor was coming to life, that low, steady thrum of equipment, starting up voices crossing the floor, the way they do between people who've worked side by side long enough to skip the pleasantries. Those were my people. They had been for decades. And for 2 years, someone had been moving through their workspace and taking from them. Her application, I said. "Show me." Hector pushed the third folder across the desk. Darla Prentice's employment application, submitted 14 months ago. The references she'd listed were a design firm in Asheville and a furniture retailer in New Jersey. Hector had drawn a line through both names. The Asheville firm folded in 2018. The New Jersey retailer, he said, has no record of ever employing anyone by that name, who handled her onboarding Barrett. Hector's voice was flat. He told our HR coordinator she came through a professional contact of his. Highly recommended. He vouched for her personally. I turned to the last page of the folder. Hector had printed a photograph, low resolution, pulled from an old social media account that had sat mostly dormant for years. 2 people at a kitchen table, paper plates, a turkey centerpiece. The image was grainy, but the faces came through clearly enough. On the left, Barrett Ventry, visibly younger, 17 or 18 at most. On the right, a girl 4 or 5 years older, her arm around his shoulders, both of them grinning at whoever was holding the camera. Someone had written on the back in blue pen, the ink a little faded, "Barrett and Darla, Thanksgiving 2000. Darla Prentice." I held the photograph for a long moment. Then I set it down carefully on the desk, the way you set something down when your hands don't quite know what to do next. "He brought her in," I said, "under a different name, before there was any reason for us to look, before he married Celeste." Hector said quietly, "She's been inside the company for 14 months. The damaged goods scheme started 2 months after she came on. The production floor kept its steady hum beyond the window. Someone laughed at something. A forklift beeped in reverse. I thought about Barrett Ventry at my dinner table in 2017 asking about my retirement with that smooth, unhurried ease. The way he'd taken in the answers quickly and cleanly, no follow-up questions asked. I'd noticed it even then. I'd told myself I was reading too much into things. "Leonard," Hector's voice brought me back. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it. Go ahead." Darla Prentice has been inside this company for over a year. If Barrett placed her here before things with Celeste got serious, before the engagement, before any of this, then it wasn't opportunistic. He let the sentence rest a moment. This was planned. The question underneath what Hector was saying was one I'd been circling ever since I'd seen that photograph. I didn't say it aloud. Saying it aloud would give it a weight I wasn't ready for. Did Barrett Ventry fall in love with my daughter, or did he find her because he already knew what her family held? I stood, pulled my coat on. "I want to see her," I said. "Darla Prentice," without her knowing, "we're looking." Hector nodded and reached for his phone. "She's at the showroom until 4. I drove to the showroom on my own and parked across the street. Through the plate glass, I could see the floor laid out display groupings arranged with deliberate care, the warm lighting that makes furniture look like it already belongs somewhere you'd want to live. I had designed this space with the same attention I'd given every showroom we'd ever opened. Darla Prentice was at the sales counter near the back, talking with a customer, gesturing toward a display cabinet. Her posture was easy and professional. She was good at it. You could see that from the street. She knew the product. She smiled at the right moments. She had been moving through my company for 14 months, sitting in the break room with my employees learning the inventory system, putting her name on 47 documents that sent $210,000 out the back door. I watched her for perhaps 3 minutes. Then I started the car and drove away without going in. Some confrontations need to happen at the right time, in the right place, with the right people present. This wasn't that moment, but I was getting closer. There was still one person I needed to talk to. First, someone Celeste believed was acting in her corner. Someone she'd been depending on to deliver exactly what she needed. She had no idea he'd been working against her from the start. Let me tell you about the keys. Early October, I spent 20 minutes searching for my house keys before I found them in the refrigerator, wedged between an orange juice carton and a block of cheese. I stood there holding them, with the door hanging open, genuinely at a loss. I was 68 years old and had never once put my keys in the refrigerator in my life. I mentioned it to Celeste at breakfast. She glanced up from her phone with an expression I couldn't quite pin down, something between concern and something else that moved across her face too quickly to catch. "That's the 3rd time this month, Dad," she said. "I'm really starting to worry. I hadn't lost my keys 3 times that month. Once on a Tuesday, and I'd found them in my coat pocket right where I'd left them." I noted the comment and went on eating my toast. It was only weeks later, after I'd begun paying close attention to everything, that I went back through the footage from the small camera Hector had helped me put up in the hallway outside my room. The recording from that morning showed Barrett at 6:47 a.m., opening my door while I was in the shower, crossing to the nightstand, picking up my keys and carrying them to the kitchen. I watched that clip 4 times. The stove came next. In November, Celeste showed 3 relatives a video on her phone, her voice warm with practiced worry. "This is what I mean. He just leaves it running and walks away." The footage showed the front left burner glowing red, the kitchen empty. What it didn't show was Celeste an hour earlier turning that burner back on after I had already switched it off and gone to my room. I knew this because I'd checked the kitchen myself that morning, and it was off. And I knew it because Hector found a deleted clip in the cloud backup of Celeste's phone, a video of her at the stove finger on the knob, which she'd recorded for reasons I didn't want to think through too carefully. There was also the matter of the medication. Someone had swapped the labels on 2 of my bottles. Nothing dangerous, just enough to leave me confused if I followed the printed directions. And one evening in late October, Barrett offered to drive me to dinner and took a route through a part of the city I didn't know. He stepped out to take a call and left me at an unfamiliar intersection for 11 minutes, while, as I discovered later, he stood 20 feet away filming my expression through the windshield. Celeste had shown that video to her aunt at Thanksgiving. "He didn't know where he was," Celeste told her. "It's getting worse." I had known exactly where I was. I simply hadn't understood why Barrett had stopped the car there. Dr. Hargrove's office was on the 4th floor of a medical building on the east side of the city, up a staircase with a wooden banister worn smooth by years of passing hands. The waiting room had plants, real ones, not plastic, and a window looking out over a small courtyard where a lone maple tree was giving up its last leaves to the December cold. I had been there 4 times since October. This was the first time I'd come on my own. The doctor was 55 with the measured, unhurried manner of someone who'd figured out early that pushing patients along solved nothing. He'd been in practice 28 years. Celeste had found him through a friend's recommendation. She'd told me he was careful and kind, which was accurate. What she hadn't counted on was what careful meant to Dr. Hargrove. He pulled the door shut and settled across from me. "I'm glad you came by yourself today," he said. "There are things I've been holding back until I could show them to you directly." He opened a folder on the desk and turned it around to face me. 4 documents each headed with a date and a test name. Standard cognitive assessment instruments, the kind designed to measure memory processing speed, executive function, and orientation. I'd taken versions of these at each of our appointments, though. Dr. Hargrove had worked them into conversation so smoothly, I'd barely registered them. "Your results across 4 separate assessments," he said, "are consistent with a man in excellent cognitive health for his age. There is no clinical evidence of memory impairment, no markers for early-stage dementia, and no basis of any kind for a finding of diminished capacity." He paused. "That's the medical picture. Now let me show you the other thing." He reached into a second folder and drew out a printed email. He set it on the desk and turned it to face me. It had come from Celeste's personal address, sent to Dr. Hargrove's office account 6 weeks ago, 3 days before my second appointment. "Dr. Hargrove, thank you again for seeing my father. I wanted to follow up on what we discussed. We really just need the documentation to reflect that he's having difficulty managing his financial affairs independently. You don't need to go into detail. Just a note confirming diminished capacity would be sufficient. We'll handle everything on our end from there. I know this is an unusual request, and we'd be happy to express our gratitude appropriately. Please let me know, Celeste Ventry." I read it twice. My jaw went tight. Something hot moved through my chest and then dropped cold. "We'd be happy to express our gratitude appropriately," 6 words carrying a specific and ugly meaning. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her I would review my notes and be in touch," Dr. Hargrove said. I neither confirmed nor refused. I wanted her to believe I was weighing it. He held my gaze steadily. "I kept the email from the day it arrived. I also noted my concern in your file, a written record that the request appeared to be an attempt to obtain a false medical opinion for legal use. And you said nothing to me until now. I was waiting for you to come without her," he said simply. "I didn't want to raise this in her presence." He slid a second document across the desk. "This is a signed statement from me as your treating physician attesting to your full cognitive competency. It references all 4 independent assessments and directly refutes any claim of diminished capacity." He folded his hands on the desk. "If you need me to testify, I will. I've done it before." I looked at the 2 documents lying side by side, Celeste's email and Dr. Hargrove's statement. What my daughter had tried to construct and what would take it apart. "Thank you," I said. The words came out quieter than I'd meant them. "You didn't have to do any of this." "I'm a physician," he said. "This is precisely what I'm here for." I sat in my car in the parking structure afterward, the folder resting on the passenger seat. I thought about the last time Celeste had sat in that waiting room alongside me, the way she'd taken my arm on the stairs, told the receptionist, "My father sometimes gets a little confused," and turned that particular smile on Dr. Hargrove, the one she deployed when she needed someone to see her a certain way. She had been completely certain he was already on her side. The scheme she and Barrett were constructing had more layers than I'd first grasped. The affidavit Hector had uncovered, the medical documentation Celeste had tried to manufacture, the financial records she was about to falsify. Each piece shaped to present me as a man who could no longer speak for himself. They needed to finish before I moved, which meant I needed to move sooner than I'd planned. I called Celeste on the 3rd of January. A Tuesday morning, cold and gray, the kind of day that made everything feel a little more weighted than it was. I sat at the kitchen table and let the phone ring twice before she answered. When she did, I let my voice do something I hadn't done in years. I let it sound tired. Not the ordinary tired of a bad night's sleep, but something deeper, the sound of a man whose resistance was finally wearing thin. "Celeste," I said, "it's Dad. I've been thinking about what." Her voice came back, careful, measured, "about what you said at Christmas. About being realistic." I paused, let a breath ease through the line. "I'm 68 years old. I've been stubborn about a lot of things. Maybe too stubborn." Another pause. Maybe you and Barrett were right about more than I wanted to acknowledge. 3 seconds of silence. Then, Dad, do you want to come over? If that's all right, I said. I think it's time we talk properly. Of course, she said. Come whenever, we'll be home all afternoon. And underneath the words running fast and bright, like something she couldn't quite hold in, was a feeling I recognized in her voice the way you recognize a smell from childhood, relief, anticipation, the particular electricity of someone who has been waiting a long time for things to finally break their way. I put my coat on and checked the inside pocket. The small recording device Hector had given me was exactly where I'd clipped it to the lining the night before. Then I drove to the estate. Celeste opened the front door before I'd reached the top step. She had on a soft blue sweater I hadn't seen before, her hair down, a smile already moving across her face as I came up the walk. The smile arrived about half a second ahead of the concern she arranged over it. In that half second, I saw everything I needed to see. Dad. She took my arm in both hands, warm and firm. Come in, come in. Are you cold? I just made tea. Tea would be good, I said. The living room was warm. Barrett was already there, standing near the window, with his hands in his pockets, dressed neatly, his posture just a fraction too still, the posture of a man who had rehearsed being at ease. Leonard. He came across the room and shook my hand. Firm grip, steady eyes. Good to see you, Barrett, I said. We sat. Celeste brought tea on a tray, the good cups, the ones kept back for guests. She poured mine, first added milk in the amount she knew I took, without asking, and placed it in front of me with both hands. 3 years I had lived under this roof. She had never poured my tea first. Barrett leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice kept low and even. Leonard, we know this hasn't been easy. The holidays got heated. Things came out in ways they probably shouldn't have. He offered a small, self-deprecating smile. Celeste and I have talked a great deal since Christmas. We want what's best for you. That's the only thing this has ever been about. My chest ached, not because I believed him, but because Celeste was nodding with her eyes bright. And some part of me, some stubborn, foolish corner, still wanted it to be true. I know, I said. I know you do. Barrett reached to the side table and picked up a folder. Thick, carefully put together, the kind assembled with real intention. I pulled some paperwork together, he said, setting it on the coffee table between us and opening it with the unhurried confidence of a man who expected no resistance. It's straightforward, nothing complicated. Just some documents designed to make things easier for everyone, and especially for you. The top sheet was a healthcare directive standard language, the kind available on any legal website. Beneath it sat what appeared to be a financial management authorization, the sort of document that once signed would hand Barrett and Celeste the legal standing to make decisions about my assets on my behalf. Buried on page 4 between a medical information release and a document I recognized as a property management transfer was the clause that carried all the weight, a provision granting Barrett Ventry sole discretionary authority over the business assets of Caulfield Woodcraft and Distribution, Inc., in the event that Leonard Caulfield was deemed unable to manage said assets independently. I turned each page with hands that trembled slightly, just enough. I let my eyes track slowly across the page. Let my brow knit the way it does when a person's genuinely working to make sense of something. This is a lot to get through, I said, keeping my voice low. Take all the time you need, Barrett said. He was reclining now, one arm draped along the back of the couch, his whole bearing easing up by degrees. He figured the difficult part was behind him. Celeste reached over and laid her hand on top of mine. We'll walk you through anything that's unclear, Dad. Just ask. I looked at her hand resting over mine, warm and still, and my eyes burned in a way I hadn't braced for. Not because of the manipulation, because of whose hands these were, my daughter's hands. The same hands I'd held in a hospital room 39 years ago when she was 4 hours old, and I was 29 and Adele was asleep. And I sat in the chair beside the bed, cradling the smallest, most terrifying thing I had ever been entrusted with. I reached for the pen Barrett had set beside the folder. Could you get me a glass of water, sweetheart? I said to Celeste. My throat's a little dry. Of course. She was on her feet at once, moving toward the kitchen, her steps quick and willing. The moment she rounded the corner, I stopped looking at the signature line. I turned to the very last page of the document. A page that held nothing but a footer with the document reference number and a narrow blank margin along the bottom. I wrote 7 words in that margin in my clearest hand. This document was not signed. L. Caulfield. I turned back to the front page just as Celeste came back with the water. "Thank you," I said. I drank slowly, set the glass down, let my shoulders sag in a way that read as a man running out of fight. I need a little more time with this. My eyes aren't what they used to be. Barrett's jaw tightened just a hair, just for a moment. "Of course," he said. "No rush." There was. We both knew it. Neither of us said so. I got to my feet, gathered my coat, and shook Barrett's hand again. He held it a beat longer than he needed to, his eyes moving over my face looking for something. Reassurance, maybe. Some sign that the next visit would go his way. I leaned down and kissed Celeste on the forehead. She looked up at me with eyes that were soft and hopeful, and beneath all of that, desperate in a way that cracked something open in my chest. "I'll call you," I said. In the car, I sat a moment with my hand on the ignition. The recording device inside my coat pocket had been running from the second I came up the front walk. 37 minutes of Barrett's measured voice, Celeste's rehearsed warmth, and the particular quiet of a room where everyone in it was performing a part they hadn't admitted to. I turned the key. As I pulled away from the curb, I kept thinking about those 7 words in the margin of the last page. Barrett would find them when he went through the folder that night. And when he did, he'd realize for the first time that the conversation in that living room had not unfolded the way he believed it had. The expression on his face when he read them, that was something I was sorry I wouldn't be around to witness. My phone rang at 2:14 a.m. I was already awake, had been for an hour lying in the dark with only the ceiling and my own thoughts for company. I picked up on the second ring. "Dad." Celeste's voice had been stripped of everything I was used to hearing in it. No warmth, no performance, no carefully measured register. Just 3 letters flat and cold. "Can you meet me now?" "Now, come here," I said. Doors unlocked. She arrived 20 minutes later. She had on a gray sweatshirt I'd never seen and jeans with a paint stain on the knee. Her hair pulled back without any thought given to it. Her face completely bare. No makeup, no earrings, none of the usual armor. She looked younger than 39. She looked exhausted all the way through. She stood in the doorway of my apartment and took in the space. Really took it in the way she never had in 3 years of knowing this place existed. The small kitchen, the worn couch, the workbench on the balcony, with its tools hanging in neat rows. I watched something pass across her face that I couldn't quite name, not guilt exactly, not grief exactly, but something that occupied the territory between them. "Sit down," I said. "I'll make tea. I don't need tea." But she sat. She set her phone on the table between us and pushed it toward me. The screen showed a Photos app. Screenshots, dozens of them. The kind you take fast when you're afraid time is about to run out. "I found these on Barrett's laptop," she said. He left it open. I don't think he meant to. I picked up the phone. The first screenshot was a document, a transfer agreement, dense legal language, precise and deliberate. I read enough to grasp it. The sale of all operating assets of Barrett Venture Design LLC to be completed within 60 days of the transfer of controlling interest in Caulfield Woodcraft and Distribution, Inc. The second screenshot showed a bank account application offshore. The account holder's name was Barrett Venture alone. The third made my stomach drop, a corporate formation document for a shell company registered in Delaware. Listed as sole director, Celeste Caulfield Venture. Listed liabilities $480,000 in existing debt assumed upon formation. Celeste was watching my face as I scrolled. "Keep going," she said, her voice tight as a wire. The fourth screenshot was a text thread. The contact was saved under a single initial. The messages stretched back 8 months. "This is taking longer than I thought," Barrett had written. How much longer, came the reply. "Old man's more stubborn than I expected. But it's close. Once he signs, we're done here. I'll have everything moved within 30 days, and then we're on a plane. I can't keep waiting, Barrett. You won't have to. After the old man signs, we leave Tennessee for good." I put the phone on the table. My jaw was clenched so hard it ached. "He was going to put you in a company carrying nearly $500,000 of debt," I said, while he moved the assets offshore. "I know." Celeste pressed her fingers to her mouth. Her eyes were red at the edges, but she wasn't crying. She was too furious for tears, the kind of anger that burns them off before they can form. "I know what he was going to do to me. I know what I was to him." Her voice cracked on that last word, just slightly, just enough to let something true through. "I need you to tell me it's not true, that I didn't spend 6 years married to someone who chose me because of you." That landed somewhere I hadn't thought to protect. My throat closed. "Celeste, don't!" She raised one hand palm out. "Don't say something kind right now. I can't handle kind right now. I drew in a breath and let it out slowly. I don't know if he ever loved you, I said. I genuinely don't know, but I know he used you and I know you deserve better than that. You always did. Her chin wobbled. She pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling until she had herself back. Then she looked at me, clear-eyed, composed, and something else. Something I recognized with a heavy feeling settling in my gut. I can get you everything she said, every document on that laptop. His financial records, the offshore account, details the shell company paperwork, the text messages. I can give you enough to put him away. She sat straighter in the chair. But I need something in return. Leave me the house and give me a stake in the company. There it was. The air went out of the room, not all at once slowly, like a gradual leak until what remained felt thin and insufficient. I looked at my daughter, this woman I had held as a newborn, watched find her footing, watched grow into someone I sometimes barely recognized. She was hurting. That was genuine. The tears she'd been holding back were genuine. But the calculation running beneath the hurt was just as real, and she hadn't thought to conceal it or hadn't managed to. She wasn't here because something had shifted in her heart. She was here because her husband had been about to cut her loose, and she needed to come down on the right side before the ground disappeared beneath her. All right, I said. Let me think about what's possible. She nodded satisfied and reached for the phone to gather her screenshots. She didn't notice that I hadn't actually said yes. She heard what she needed to hear, the way people do when they've already settled on what the answer will be. After she left, I stood at the window and watched her car disappear from the curb. My chest felt like someone had pressed a thumb into a bruise and just kept it there. There was still one thing I hadn't done, one place I hadn't returned to since Adele died. And I was starting to understand that before any of this could be finished, I needed to go there first. Sylvia called on a Thursday afternoon in late January. The bank reached out this morning, she said, skipping any preamble. The commercial lending department at Cumberland Lending had flagged something irregular in a loan application they'd been processing. $300,000 business expansion. The guarantor's signature was mine. My grip on the phone tightened. When was it filed? November. It's been working through the system ever since. They only caught it because you've never had any direct dealings with their commercial division. When they went to verify the signature through standard channels, it didn't match what they had on record. A short pause. Leonard, I've already been in touch with a forensic document examiner. She can see us first thing tomorrow morning. I'll be there, I said. The examiner was Dr. Cecile Wyndham, a compact woman in her early 60s, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades being correct about things, and had long since stopped feeling any obligation to soften that for anyone's benefit. Her workspace was a converted office in a building near the courthouse, every surface laid out with documents, light boxes, and equipment I had no name for. She already had the loan application and the guarantor page positioned under magnification when Sylvia and I walked in. Sit down, she said without looking up. I'll show you what I found. She moved to the light box and placed two images side by side, a high-resolution scan of the signature on the loan document and what appeared to be a handwritten note. The signature on the loan application, she said, pointing to the image on the left, was not produced by a human hand. It had been digitally constructed, vectorized, to use the technical term from a source signature. The pixel structure is too consistent. Genuine handwriting carries micro variations in pressure and speed. This has none. She tapped the image on the right. This is the source. The signature on the loan document was assembled from this. I leaned in closer. The right image was a birthday card. My own handwriting unmistakable with the slight forward lean I'd had since my 20s. The inscription read, "Happy birthday, my darling daughter. No matter how old you get, I will always be standing behind you. Signed, Leonard." I stopped breathing for a moment. Sylvia reached into her folder and set the original card on the table in front of me. Celeste's 35th birthday, 3 years ago. I had spent 15 minutes in a stationery store, choosing. It picked it up, set it back, it picked it up again, because the words inside were exactly right. And I wanted her to have something that carried real weight. I had written those words with a good pen at my kitchen table on a Sunday morning with the radio on. I will always be standing behind you. She had taken those words, that specific handwriting, from that specific card and fed it into software that rebuilt my signature pixel by pixel and placed it on a document committing me to $300 to $1,000 of someone else's debt. My eyes burned. Not from grief, from something rawer than grief, something without a clean name. Betrayal is too small a word. for what it feels like when love is turned into an instrument. Is this admissible? My voice came out level. I was entirely proud of that. Dr. Wyndham said I've testified in 14 federal cases involving digitally manipulated signatures. The analysis I've conducted here meets the Doe-Bear standard for expert testimony. The bank will have grounds to file a criminal referral for forgery and bank fraud, both federal offenses. She looked at me over the top of her glasses. Whoever did this was technically capable but legally naive. They assumed digital forgery was more difficult to detect than it once was. It isn't. Sylvia placed her hand flat on the table, her voice measured. Leonard, do you know who had access to that card? It was displayed in the living room of the estate, I said, on the mantel for about a year after Celeste's birthday. I looked at the card in my hands. Anyone who came through that house could have photographed it. Dr. Wyndham removed her glasses. The full written report will be ready in 48 hours. Do you want me to coordinate directly with your attorney for the criminal referral or with my attorney? I said. Sylvia handles everything. Sylvia gave a nod and began collecting her files. Dr. Wyndham launched into timelines and filing procedures, and the two of them carried on while I sat at the table holding the birthday card. I thought about that Sunday morning I'd written it, the radio playing something I can't place now, the good pen. The 15 minutes in the stationery store weighing the choice carefully, because I wanted the words to mean something when they arrived. I will always be standing behind you. I had meant every word. That was the part that cut the deepest. Not that she'd used the card, that the words were still true even now, even knowing everything. I set the card on the table and stood up. Sylvia, I said. She looked up from her notes. I'm sorry, Leonard, she said. It was the first time in 9 years she had addressed me by my first name. Something about that small shift made my throat close in a way I hadn't anticipated. Don't apologize, I said. Just do what needs to be done. She held my eyes for a moment, then gave a single nod and turned back to Dr. Wyndham. The 12th of February arrived cold and still. I drove out to the old workshop before sunrise when the streets were empty and the city hadn't yet roused itself to go anywhere. The building sat at the end of a service road behind the original distribution lot, a low structure of concrete block and timber, framing that we'd taken out of production 12 years ago when the third workshop came online and this one became storage. We'd held onto it because Adele wouldn't hear of selling. It's where we started, she'd said. The one time I'd floated the idea. You don't sell where you started. I'd never brought it up again. Inside it smelled the way I remembered old wood linseed oil, the particular dusty sweetness of timber that had soaked up decades of work. My footsteps rang against the plank floor as I moved toward the back wall past the shelving units we'd put up in 1990, past the rack of hand tools Adele had insisted on keeping even after we moved to machine production. Good tools deserve to be kept, she used to say, even when you don't need them anymore. The safe sat behind the third shelf unit from the left, set into the wall at waist height, hidden behind a false panel that matched the surrounding concrete block. Adele and I had installed it together in 2002. I hadn't opened it since the week she was diagnosed when she'd brought me here and said, when the time comes, Leonard, not before. My hands weren't quite steady as I moved the panel aside. Not from the cold, from the particular trembling that comes when you're about to cross a threshold you can't uncross. The key slid in, the lock turned, and inside a cloth-bound notebook, a plain composition book, the kind sold at any drugstore with Adele's name written to the inside cover in her careful hand. A thick manila envelope sealed with a rubber band. A small USB drive in a plastic sleeve. A folded legal-sized document with a notary seal on the last page. And a handwritten note on a torn scrap of paper. Leonard watched the USB first. Love, R. My chest seized so hard I had to press one hand flat against the shelf just to keep myself steady. I carried everything to the old workbench, set up the battered laptop I'd brought from the car, and plugged in the drive. One file of video, dated 3 years before Adele died. I pressed play. She was sitting at this same workbench. The camera must have been propped against something. The angle was slightly low, a little off-center the way footage looks when there's nobody behind the lens. She was wearing the gray cardigan she'd had for years, the one with the loose button on the right cuff she kept meaning to fix and never did. Her hair was shorter than I remembered from that period. Her face was thinner, but her eyes. Her eyes were, Adele's eyes, clear and steady, already fixed on something ahead that I couldn't make out yet. "Hello, Leonard," she said. My throat closed completely. I hadn't heard her voice in 10 years, Not once, not in any recording, because I'd never been able to bring myself to sit through one. And here she was, position 3F'd, from where I stood in this room that carried the scent of everything we'd made together, speaking to me as though no time had passed at all. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and kept it there. "I'm gonna keep this practical," Adele said, "because you know I get maudlin if I'm not careful, and there's no time for that." She glanced down at something in her lap. Notes. She'd actually written notes. "I need to tell you a few things. The first is that I'm sorry I couldn't say this to you directly. I tried more than once and kept losing my nerve. That's not like me, I know that. But this one was hard." She drew a short breath. "I've been thinking about what becomes of everything we built. Not us, the company, the people who count on it. And I've been thinking about Celeste." Her jaw tightened slightly. "She's going to fall in love again someday, Leonard. She always gives her whole heart first. That's a beautiful thing. It's also a dangerous one. And the wrong kind of right person will see what she comes from before he ever sees who she is. I don't know who that will be. I may never find out. But I spoke with Sylvia. I had the bylaws amended." Her voice carried the same deliberate steadiness it always had when she'd already thought something all the way through. "Any sale or dissolution of Caulfield Woodcraft requires approval from a council of 7 employees who have worked for the company for 10 years or more. The council must convene, vote, and reach a 2-3 majority. Without that, no sale proceeds, not legally, not ever." She looked straight into the camera, and for one unsettling moment it felt as though she was looking straight at me. "If I'm wrong," she said, "then these provisions don't hurt anyone. The company runs exactly as it always has. Leonard keeps working until he chooses to stop." A small pause. "But if I'm right, and I believe I'm right about the kind of risk that finds people who have something worth taking, then even if someone gets everything they go after, they still can't do the one thing they actually came to do. They can't sell it. The people who built this place alongside us will have the final word, not them." She smiled then. That small, satisfied smile she had when a ledger balanced exactly the way she'd intended. "I love you," she said simply. "Take care of the people. They are the whole point." The video ended. I sat in that old workshop with the laptop open on a dark screen and wept, not quietly, not with any particular composure, just the way a man weeps when he's been carrying something for a very long time and has finally run out of room for it. My shoulders shook, my face crumpled. Tears ran down into my collar, and I let them. Adele had known. She had understood years before any of it unfolded, and she had built a wall around everything we'd made together. And she'd done it without telling me, because she knew I would have pushed back, would have called it paranoid, would have said, "Give him a chance." She hadn't needed my agreement. She only needed me to find this room when the moment arrived. When I could breathe steadily again, I took out my phone and called Sylvia. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Better than I've been in some time," I said, and meant it. "I need you to arrange a meeting. The old workshop, the first one. I'll fill you in when I see you, but Sylvia, make sure Barrett and Celeste both attend. Tell them I'm ready to sign." A pause. "Leonard, is this what I think it is?" "Schedule it for the 12th of March, I said, the anniversary of the day Adele died. I think she'd appreciate the timing. I chose the old workshop for a reason I didn't explain to anyone. This was the room where Adele and I had slept on a folded tarp in 1982, because we couldn't cover both the security deposit and a full month's rent anywhere else. The floor beneath me was the same floor we'd swept together at the end of every working day for the first 4 years. The smell was unchanged sawdust and linseed oil and something older beneath, that the scent of a building that had absorbed serious work over a long time. If everything we'd built was going to be contested, I wanted it contested here in the room. That knew the truth better than any courtroom. Hector arrived first at 7:30 in the morning and helped me push 2 long tables together, end to end down the middle of the space. We didn't talk much. Hector set out the chairs, 6 on one side, 2 on the other, and I brewed a thermos of coffee in the small kitchen alcove we'd put in back in 2000. "You look calm," Hector said, pouring himself a cup. "I've been calm since February," I said. "Once I knew what Adele left us, I stopped being afraid of any of this." Hector looked at me over the rim of his cup. "She was something else," he said quietly. "She really was." Barrett and Celeste arrived at 9:00 exactly, which told me Barrett had been sitting somewhere nearby, waiting to time an entrance that read as punctual without looking eager. He was dressed for a closing charcoal suit, polished shoes, the kind of studied presentation that costs real money and is meant to signal that you are in the company of someone accustomed to winning. He carried a leather portfolio. Behind him, Celeste wore a dark blazer, her hair pulled back her face, arranged in a composure that required visible effort. Behind them came a man I didn't recognize, 50s wire-rimmed glasses, and expensive briefcase. Barrett's attorney. Beside him, a woman in a gray suit with a notary stamp in a zippered case. Barrett shook my hand at the door. His grip was firm. His eyes were bright with something he was working to contain, that particular gleam of a man who believes he is an hour away from everything he's been working toward. "Leonard," he said warmly, "thank you for putting this together." "Of course," I said. "Coffee's in the alcove. Help yourselves." We sat. Barrett's attorney opened the portfolio and produced the documents, the same transfer agreement from January, revised and reprinted, with additional pages that I noted were the falsified financial records Sylvia had been building a case around for 2 months. The cognitive decline report was there as well, a 2-page letter from a physician I had never met asserting that, in his clinical opinion, Leonard Caulfield showed signs of cognitive impairment sufficient to warrant supervised financial management. Barrett slid the package across the table with both hands like something ceremonial. "We've simplified things since January," he said. "Tighten the language. It's really just a formality at this point, Leonard. This protects you as much as anyone." I picked up the documents and read through them page by page, slowly. Barrett's attorney leaned over and helpfully flagged the sections he considered most important. Celeste watched me from across the table with an expression I couldn't fully decode, something that shifted between hope and unease, the look of someone who has climbed a long way out on a limb and is only now beginning to look down. I turned each page with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who had nowhere to be and nothing left to prove, which was at that moment precisely what I was. Barrett refilled his coffee, came back, sat, adjusted the position of his portfolio once, then again. His foot tapped once against the floor and went still. I reached the last page, blank except for a signature line, a date field, and a notary block. Clean and simple, the final step in a process that had been building for 3 years. I picked up the pen Barrett had set beside the folder. I signed. Barrett's shoulders dropped 2 full inches. He exhaled through his nose and reached over to squeeze Celeste's hand. She didn't squeeze back. I noticed her eyes hadn't left my face, searching for something she couldn't locate. "Wonderful," Barrett said, reaching for the documents. "If we could just get the notary to 1 moment," I said pleasantly. "Before we notarize, would you have the final page read aloud? I want to be certain everyone in the room has heard the same language." Barrett's attorney frowned slightly. "That's not standard procedure." "Humor an old man," I said. The notary, who had no stake in any of this and was simply doing her job, lifted the final page and began to read. Her voice changed about 4 words, in just slightly a fractional hesitation, the sound of a person whose eyes have moved ahead of their mouth and encountered something they didn't expect. She read on. The final page was not a signature authorization. What the notary had just read aloud was a voluntary disclosure statement, a document certifying that Barrett Ventry and Celeste Caulfield Ventry had on this date freely presented and vouched for the authenticity of every item brought into this room before named witnesses whose signatures were listed on an attached page. I was one of those witnesses. The far door swung open. Hector came through first. Sylvia followed, briefcase already unlatched and open. After Sylvia, 2 men in dark overcoats entered with the clipped, deliberate movement of people for whom this kind of room is routine. Financial crimes, investigators, federal. And trailing them, a forensic accountant Sylvia had brought on 6 weeks prior, someone who had spent those 6 weeks combing through every financial record Barrett and Celeste had submitted under their lease renewal application. Barrett shoved back from the table so hard his chair tipped and fell, the impact cracking off the concrete floor like a gunshot through the whole building. For the first time in 3 years, he looked at me with nothing in between. No calculation, no performance, none of the frictionless social machinery he'd kept running every moment we'd shared a room. Strip all that away, and what remained was smaller than I'd imagined. A man at the end of his hand. Celeste didn't turn toward Barrett. She didn't acknowledge the investigators, or Sylvia. Her gaze came straight across the table to me. Papers fanned out between us. Cold morning light pressed in through the high windows. Her eyes held tears she was refusing to release. Both hands lay motionless on the table surface, flat and still. I kept my eyes on hers and felt something divide in my chest. One part for the daughter I had brought up, and one part for the person she had chosen to be. "Mr. Ventry," one of the investigators said, "I have some questions for you." Barrett's attorney was already standing palm-raised, professional muscle memory, taking over even while his client stood frozen beside the upended chair. I got to my feet, took my thermos, and headed for the alcove to pour myself another cup. The room at my back filled with the loud, tangled business of consequences coming due all at once. Once legal machinery engages, it doesn't move fast. But it doesn't stop either. Barrett was in federal custody before March was out, awaiting arraignment. Bank fraud, forgery, embezzlement. The charges were heavy enough that his attorney spent 2 weeks arguing unsuccessfully to bring the bail figure down. Darla Prentice surfaced that same week. Confronted with the Thanksgiving photograph and the doctored employment paperwork, she requested a lawyer and went silent. Sylvia told me that silence amounted to a confession. I skipped every hearing. I drove to the workshop and sanded surfaces that had no need of sanding and let Hector field whatever calls came in. April brought word for Celeste, her name on 47 damaged goods. Authorizations had made her a material participant in the embezzlement scheme. Her lawyer traded cooperation for reduced civil exposure. She handed over everything, the screenshots she'd slid across my kitchen table at 2:00 in the morning, the text thread, 3 months of financial records she had quietly copied before walking out of the house. A room in a shared apartment, $650 a month starting in April. Her first real rent drawn from money she herself had earned. I left the phone alone. I waited. A Tuesday afternoon in May, she appeared at my door. No crisis hour, no urgency, just a knock like any ordinary caller. She came to the kitchen table in a plain gray sweater, glanced down at her hands, gathered herself, and spoke. "I don't understand how you did it," she said. The Polish had been worn entirely off her voice. "Month after month, how did you just sit there and hold still? How did you carry the weight of all that without it flattening you?" Looking at the rawness in her face tightened something in my chest. My daughter sitting across from me, without anything between us, none of the practice layers. "It wasn't something I was carrying," I said. "I was simply waiting to find out who you'd turn into once there was nothing left to hide behind." She raised her eyes to mine. "And I'm still watching." I told her no softening on it. Her eyes went bright and liquid. She pressed her mouth shut and held on. Then a laugh came out short and waterlogged, and she said, "That's a very bad answer." "I'm a very dad person," I said. She finished her tea and went. The shortest visit in years and the most truthful. June. I put my name on the restructured ownership papers. 51% of Caulfield Woodcraft and Distribution, Inc., into an employee trust governed by the Council of Long-Serving Workers, who had made the place what it was. 20% into a craftsmanship training fund named in Adele's memory. Celeste's share a modest living stipend, conditional on cooperation and on repaying what had been taken over time. No seat at any table, no ownership, no concessions. Hector turned through the final page a second time. "Adele wrote most of this," he said. "Every word of it," I said. "I only held the pen." October. Barrett was sentenced to 4 years. I was in the workshop working a cabinet door that had bowed in the damp when Hector rang to tell me. I thanked him and went back to sanding. November arrived with an early freeze. A Saturday morning weekend market 2 blocks from my building. Celeste was at a small table toward the back, a collection of hand-finished wooden picture frames arranged in neat stacks around her. She had a customer in front of her, and she was leaning in, pointing out the figure in the grain, her face open and animated in a way I had not seen in a long time. When the customer lifted one of the frames, the smile that crossed Celeste's face was small, unperformed, and entirely her own. I turned for home and didn't go near her. Some things require distance to grow into themselves properly. December, 3 weeks out from Christmas. A quiet evening at the old workshop, me alone in the stillness when gravel shifted outside under someone's feet. Then a knock at the door. I pulled it open. Celeste was standing outside on the gravel, a piece of furniture cradled under one arm, a small wooden chair loosely wrapped in burlap, the kind of covering you reach for when you've built something yourself and aren't yet certain it merits being seen uncovered. Plain wool coat one I'd never laid eyes on, no makeup, hair back in a simple drugstore elastic. She looked cold, worn through, and more genuinely herself than she'd appeared in years. "I made something," she said. The words came out more steadily than I'd expected. "Can I come in?" I moved aside. She carried the chair to the workbench and peeled the burlap back in careful folds, smoothing it down as she went. A side chair, simple lines, mortise and tenon, joinery a slatted back. Poplar sanded smooth, finished with a single coat of oil that had pulled the grain to the surface nicely. 4 weeks she set eyes on the chair rather than me. The people running the Demon Brune Street training workshop let her come in on weekends. She'd scrapped it and begun again twice. Her thumb moved along the back rail. She'd bought the materials out of her own pocket. $9.60. I studied the piece the way a craftsman does joinery, first the way a musician reaches for pitch before anything else. The mortise and tenon held. The angles were clean. The surface work was patient and attentive. But the front left leg ran short. Not dramatically, perhaps 4 mm enough, though that on any level floor the chair would never sit still. I let it go without comment. "I didn't come here to negotiate what you're leaving me," Celeste said. That last word caught in her throat once, briefly the way a plank gives when someone steps on a weak board. "I understand I've got no claim to make, but this is the first object I've built from money I earned myself, and I needed it to belong to you." She looked up at last, eyes full and close to tipping. "Even if it isn't right yet." I lifted the chair, carried it to my own workbench, and placed it alongside mine, squared up, set square, and stepped away. "Sit down," I said. Celeste took in the room. Nothing available to sit on, just the tall stool against the tool rack and the bench itself. She glanced at the floor, then folded herself down onto the planking with her back to the workbench and her knees drawn up exactly the position she'd taken as a 7-year-old watching me work in this same building. Something in my chest that had been held rigid for a long time released. "That front left leg runs short," I said. "About 4 mm or so." "I know," she said quietly. "When you get home tomorrow," I said, "you'll put it right." One nod, no pushback, no maneuvering, no attempt to bargain her way to an easier requirement. I walked over to the alcove and set the kettle to boil. I found 2 mugs. The tea was the same brand Adele had kept stocked in this workshop for 30 years. I'd replaced it last month without a second thought, the way you keep up certain habits because they belong to someone you loved and you aren't quite prepared to let them dissolve. I placed 1 mug on the floor beside Celeste and settled into my chair. The workshop held its quiet around us. Beyond the walls, the December wind moved through the stripped trees lining the service road, and somewhere off in the distance a church bell counted the hour. Inside, the only sounds were the small ones, 2 people breathing and the faint ticking of the kettle as it cooled on the alcove shelf. Adele would have known exactly what to say at a moment like this. Something spare and precisely weighted the kind of words that settle over a room the way a hand settles on a shoulder. That particular gift was never mine. So I simply sat with my daughter in the room where all of it began. A cup of tea warming between my palms and a small imperfect chair standing on the workbench at my side. That evening in the old workshop, sitting beside my daughter with 2 mugs of tea and a small imperfect chair on the bench between us, I understood something I hadn't been able to put into words before. It was over. Not cleanly, not without damage, but over. This story cost me things I will never fully get back. 3 years of watching my daughter across a distance I couldn't close. The particular grief of recognizing that someone you raised is capable of becoming someone you don't recognize. What it gave me was harder to name at first, clarity eventually, and the quiet conviction that I believe God does not waste suffering, that even the years I spent in that apartment sanding wood that didn't need sanding were years. He was holding something in place until the right moment. For those of you who have walked a road anything like this one, the adults 50 plus, among us who have loved someone and been handed that love back damaged, this is what I would tell you. Document everything and say very little. The person who talks first usually hands the other side what they need. Love and trust are not the same thing. One you can give freely, the other must be earned and re-earned. When someone shows you what they are willing to do for money, believe them completely and act accordingly. And if you ever find yourself in the middle of a family revenge story you never asked to be part of, remember that patience used correctly is not weakness. It is the longest lever there is. If this story moved you, I hope you'll leave a thought in the comments. And if you know someone carrying something heavy right now, a family wound that hasn't healed a betrayal they can't talk about, share this with them. Sometimes a story is the only way in. Thank you for spending this time with me here at Honor Revenge Stories. Take care of the people around you. I'll see you in the next one.